Welcome everybody as I mumble through basically the replacement of a radiator for a Freightliner M2 with a Cummins Isb as the title says. So bear with me. The basic basically what I'm doing here is just removing the radiator. The reinstall is going to be just follow the steps in reverse. So if you can last all the way to the end of the video, you'll make it to the part where you just play it, rewind, and reinstall. Alright, the left bottom of the radiator is where you will find the drain plug, and it's always a 10 millimeter on the M2s. Doesn't matter what engine is in it. Somebody has already drained the coolant out of this thing almost completely, so we're just going to get a little bit out of it. Then you're going to want to remove the surge tank, the fill cap. The pressure cap is on the other side of it. Remove the fill cap so it doesn't go under vacuum and it will drain quicker. Support the hood up off of its hood straps, so just so you can have no tension on these straps, or very little. As you can see, they're coiled. Um, as you remove it, I believe it's a 1/4 inch Allen head and a 1/2 inch nut. I will always refer to the size of the wrench or socket used and not the actual bolt or thread size or anything to that nature, to make it a little simpler as to what tools you should grab. And it may or may not be right. I kind of done a lot of these jobs in my history, so everyone seems like every couple of years they change something, and sometimes every 6 months they change something, nut or bolt size. So I could be right or could be wrong depending on what you're working on. So there's one of these on each side, and there is also a hood strut on both sides, which just helps in lifting and lowering the hood, make sure it doesn't slam in either direction. The hood does not have to come off for almost all the Freightliners out there. You just really got to lean it forward and support it with a hydraulic table or a barrel, a garbage can, something that's very sturdy and strong. If you're putting it up on a hydraulic table, something with lockable wheels would be good. So remove the 1/2 inch bolt just to the bottom of the struts on both sides. And you'll notice in my videos I take a lot of shortcuts. I mean, I'm a master tech and I can follow 100% of, oh, did you see there the hood was actually back supported back down lower, um, just by a piece of foam. But anyway, I take a lot of shortcuts because I've been doing it for so long. I know what is redundant in the service manuals and not necessarily needed. Um, but my disclaimer, of course, says always follow the service manual. If you're not the guy that does this stuff every day and you're just here looking for a shortcut, that's fine, but that's all on you. On both sides, the top radiator has a 18 millimeter bolt and nut, and at the engine side, I believe they were 16 millimeter or a 5/8 on the right side. By the way, of course, if you're a technician, you know this, but right and left is always from sitting in the driver or passenger seat. And on the left side, you have, it's not in the picture, but there's also the same 18 millimeter bolt in front, and there's actually three 16 millimeter bolts at the rear on top of the engine, and there's also a 1/2 inch bolt holding the clamp for the top radiator return line. It's somewhere in the middle of that top bracket. So remove those overly heavy iron brackets on both sides, top of the radiator. Don't worry about the radiator. It will not fall over under any circumstances. You are bolted on bottom by two 15/16 nutted bolts. So it's still very secure. Even with everything disconnected on the radiator, it's not going to fall until you take those bottom two bolts out, which will be in the next video. Somebody already cut this off. I don't know who or why, but um, I'm apparently taking over for somebody else's job. That's a good idea if you notice that the clamps, you see my motions there, are in bad shape or any signs of leaking, to just replace them all at this point, because these are heat clamps. Basically, the dealer puts these clamps on, then they heat them up and they shrink up, and they're decent, but they don't last forever, and they're obviously not adjustable. I prefer to use a die grinder to take them off because a die grinder is really good at making the plastic disappear without hurting the rubber. It will heat up the rubber, and of course, you push too hard and you're going to cut in the rubber. But if you use a hacksaw or a utility razor knife, you're going to slice right into that hose. Then you're just going to cause yourself more work. I love a die grinder for that, or a cutoff wheel. And there's a quick little still picture of the little plastic hose clamp they use. I prefer WD-40 for this. I didn't have any handy. WD-40 tends to evaporate and not really hurt the rubber as badly. This is some PB Blaster, which does a better job of helping to remove hoses. And I love these little hose remove tools. They're amazing. Since I've got those, I don't know, some 20 years ago, my life has been a lot easier. You grab a screwdriver, your chances are you're really going to hurt the hose. You're going to stretch it out too much. And with the slightly dulled tips on those hose tools, you can point away from the rubber. You can point towards the metal and away from the rubber and not hurt the rubber. With a screwdriver, you don't have that option. You're sticking the whole flat blade in there. You're going to hit the rubber. Okay, here on the front of the cooling assembly, we have the condenser has 4 half-inch nuts, and there's also uh, rubber air diverters on both sides, and they also have 2 nuts that are 10 millimeters. Now you want to be careful when you go to take the condenser and those rubber air diverters off, because the bolts behind them are only held in by slotted areas of the charge air cooler that they could just fall right out the sides real easy, and they like to fall down in the bumper area and disappear for eternity or until you pull it out and pop your tires on them. So keep an eye out for that as you're removing these objects off the front of the radiator, that the bolts are just kind of held into the slots. I think you might be able to see that in the video here in a minute. I'm getting ready to take the AC condenser off and the charge air hoses on the hot side here. So I like to go ahead and remove the receiver dryer off of its radiator mount. It's mounted to the side of the radiator there. I come from the Midwest, where you always lube up those style spring clamps before you go to take them off. I live in SoCal now. I don't really see a problem, but it's a habit that I can't break for good reason. These things are reusable for the lifetime of a truck as long as you lube them up every time you go to use them, and don't live in too much of a salty area. The whole mindset of a job like this is try to replace only the necessities, try to save everything. Here you go. See, with the pointy tool, I can get it just under the clamp and push away from the rubber. It's real precise tools, and I can't tell you how valuable it is to have the long-handled ones that keep your knuckles from getting smacked every time you go to pop hoses off. So I'll take the receiver dryer loose out of its bracket to give me a little more room. As you can see, it's almost rubbing the charge air cooler pipe the way they mounted it, so it's kind of tight to get that pipe out unless you remove it. It's got to come out anyway off the radiator. Everything's coming off the radiator. There you go. Take the charge air cooler pipe out. Let's see, what did I do next? Alright, looks like we're going for the air diverter. Like I said, 2 10 millimeter nuts per side, and it's held in on the top of it by like a rectangular cutout. It's kind of off camera, I apologize for that. So there's like an arrow-shaped rubber coming off of the top air diverter that runs across the top of the radiator, so you just got to kind of pull it off of that. And there you go. Pull it off carefully. Like I said, the 2 bolts behind there just slip right in. There we go. You see the little slots fall right out. It keeps the bolt from turning, but it doesn't retain the bolt. At least not very well. So if you pull it the wrong way, those bolts are just going to disappear. I can tell you how many jobs I've went to do where somebody has already done a radiator or done something and they got the wrong bolts in there because they didn't take care when removing it. Anyway, moving on, getting the other side air diverter off. You'd be surprised how important these little pieces of rubber are. I have seen those things, and this is a long time ago when I worked with more of a shade tree mechanic types. But they'll pull those rubbers off, and if they're degraded or not in great shape, they'll just throw them away. Truck comes in for the next BM driver says on a hard pull going uphill it'll overheat. Those things are just wonderful at keeping the air from recirculating back around the radiator by the fan and then going right back in blowing hot air. So those things are extremely important. They basically try to get as close to the hood as possible when the hood is closed and divert the air. Now this is up to you if you want to do this. I've been working on these trucks for so long. The ACs on these systems, especially Freightliner, Kenworth, Detroit International, they're very robust. As long as you do not kink one of the hoses, you can just support this up, and I put it on basically the windshield cowl on these trucks have nice thick soft rubber that it lays on, and you see it's just hovering over the engine. So just make sure you don't kink the hoses, and then there's really no reason to evacuate the AC system. Even further simplifying this job for somebody who doesn't have an AC machine lying around. It's not really necessary. You just swing it up out of the way, support it, and make sure you don't disturb it while you're working on these systems. Um, I have yet to burst a line. As long as you're careful, you won't. And if you kink the line, well, they are plastic lined on the inside. So you might want to consider replacing a line if you do accidentally kink it. Here we have the air line that goes to the fan. You can see I got this little air push style tool. So it's like these, it's just like the quick connect connectors everywhere else, except it's a brass one. So you shove it in there, you push down on the connector. Oh, by the way, release all the air out. I got almost all the air out of the system before doing this, but this fan is activated with air. So the quickest way to remove air on a truck, um, if you hold the air drains open, it's going to take forever because they're just meant to bleed little drops of water out, not to drain the whole tank. Just push down on the brake pedal 100,000 times real fast and drain it all. But if you get most of the air out of the systems, those push tile fittings come out much easier. If you have air in the system, forget getting those things out. All right, so there are two 10 millimeter bolts holding the top of the fan shroud to the radiator, and they use like a speed nut, a spring nut that slides on the radiator. In this case, since it looks like this has never been tampered with by another human, I can only assume the dealer cross-threaded these bolts into those spring nuts, and come to find out, you'll see on video 2 probably, going to put those bolts back in for me were kind of rough because it just were misaligned with the radiator altogether. So I don't necessarily think it was their fault when this thing was put together. Probably they just powered through it. They got the first thread started crooked, stripping, and then just powered through it and put it together. No harm, no foul. I got them out. So all right. So I you don't really have to take the shroud out, but I find that the job I'm doing here and the jobs I try to do are one-man jobs. I try not to disturb other technicians. Their time is just as valuable. So I one-man these jobs using a cherry picker. So having that top shroud on there makes the chain on top a little awkward, and you don't want to break a shroud. That'd be an expensive fail right there. So get it out of the way. The bottom shroud does not have to come out on this style uh, radiator removal. Again, you can get this in there. Don't poke the rubber. Just start it right in the tip and then push it away from the rubber so you're not affecting the rubber. This style rubber versus the other side tends to be really uh, sticky to the aluminum. The aluminum seems to just corrode underneath, so these are a lot harder to come off. You can end up having to use a lot of lube, get it up in there really good, because once some of these you get them off and it's just the aluminum has turned to powder, and you'll have to clean it off with emery cloth before you put it back together. Clean the inside of the hose because you don't want any of that flipping into the intake. This one is no exception. This truck was actually like a 2016, so it's had plenty of years uh, to get some corrosion moving around. Again, I've already lubed the nuts on these before I spun them loose. Put the pin in there. Yeah, I can't even get the clamp off of this rubber, so sometimes it just takes a little work. A screwdriver will do it if you're super careful, but I prefer the pick tools if you can get your hands on them. So there you go. Push it down towards the metal. Little squirt of penetrating oil up in there and break that seal. Get enough oil in there, they'll pop off, but it's a lot more rigid than the tubes on the other side and a lot more subject to corrosion because of the type of hose. It looks like we're getting close to the end of the video here. A couple more minutes. So video 2, I will show you how to set up your chain, how to set up a cherry picker. Like I said, if you have a buddy nearby, you can skip that step altogether. It's just I'm all about safety. Any master tech out there, the first thing you do is safety. The continuous thing you do during the job is safety. And the last thing you do before your job is done is safety. And that kind of separates the master techs from the guys with the missing fingers or the broken backs, for that matter. If you set out in a career as a technician and you eventually just want to be able to do any job given to you, no matter if you've done it before or not, it involves taking everything seriously. There's a lot of shortcuts, a lot of things you can do differently than the next guy, and that's all fine. There's a million ways to do one job. But there really is a right way and a wrong way to go about the attitude of doing the job. Okay, now here is something that Cummins has that I haven't seen on any other manufacturer. They use the charge air cooler cold side to run the intake for the air compressor. It's ridiculous if you ask me, in a terribly engineered design, and I can tell you that because they use a heater hose for a boost system. Now they're like thinking in their heads, well, it's just for air compressor inlet, but they hooked it to the boost side of the air system. They really should have hooked it to like the back side of the air filter housing. So there's 2 bolts to hold this elbow on the bottom. I've replaced so many of those split hoses, and if you go across that and you notice there's a loud pumping noise and you got no power under the truck, runs and drives but doesn't die, but you hear that noise, sounds like an air compressor running, is because that hose has split. Replace it with a Gates blue stripe and you'll be fine. I have yet to see one of those blow, but I've done probably 17 or 18 of those bottom hoses and a couple of the elbows that my hands are on right now. They're just heater hose. Who would do that, right? Alright, so get that loose, get it out of the way so it doesn't cause you any problems. Just tuck it behind wires or something. Alright, that's the end of part 1. Everything is off the top and the sides. Part 2, we'll take everything off the bottom, get this thing out, swapped over, and ready to reinstall it. Thanks for watching, and check out my other YouTube channels for some great original music and a lot of crazy custom stuff I do on cars also. Alright, take care and have a great whatever it is you like to have.